Hey, Christian Life, welcome to our sabbatical Sunday. We're so glad you joined us. My prayer is that you had an amazing Christmas season with your family and that you were at home resting and recuperating from all of the family festivities and especially all the eating. A couple of things that I want to remind you about before we get into our word today is to get ready for our new year. Coming back strong on January the 7th, our 10 o'clock service, we are going to be starting a brand new series on Give God a Year. And so you're not going to want to miss that. We're going to ask you to be there for that. Start out with us and let's give God this next year. Also, I want to remind you that our 21 days of prayer and fasting is starting on the 7th as well. Begin to come up with a plan on your fasting time and what you want to do, whether it be some people can't do food because of their diet issues, and some people can't do food because of other reasons, taking medicines. But whatever that is, I want you to think about a plan. I want you to begin to plan that, and let's prepare to be intentional about 2024. I believe God's got great things for us. So today, as we get into our word, I want to start off by saying Happy New Year. Tomorrow is New Year's Day. We're going to have a fresh, brand new year. So if you didn't like something about 2023, let's make plans and make it different this year. Make 2024 different. I heard someone say one time that you don't ever get where you're going on accident. You got to have a plan. You need a roadmap. You need to find out what it is you're wanting to accomplish. And you're not going to want to miss that series on Give God a Year, because I'm going to be giving us some roadmaps on how to be intentional with our faith. We plan everything. We plan our vacations. We plan our budgets. We plan so many things, but we tend not to plan our faith. And so I want us to really focus on that. Hey, in 2023, if you struggled through some things or you're coming out of this year limping, I want to remind you of a couple of things today. And so as we get into our word, I want to remind you about Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. And it says this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If you don't fear the Lord, here's what I've discovered. Whatever you do fear is going to cause you to bow down. It's going to cause you to bow down to something, or it's going to cause you to bow down to someone other than God. We're going to look at Daniel chapter 3 today, and we're going to look at the three Hebrew children. And these three Hebrew men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are dealing with the same thing that we deal with today. And the root of everything we're dealing with is this: worship. Who are we going to decide to worship? Who are we going to choose to worship? And so in Daniel, we see that they are making a choice between which king are they going to serve and which kingdom are they going to bow down to. And so today in Daniel chapter 3, starting with verse 16, it says that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." Let me back up on this, because what is the matter here? Nebuchadnezzar, he built a big statue of himself. And he said, when all these instruments go off, I want you to bow down to this image that I've created. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be worshiped. And you know, that was the sin of Satan. He wanted to be glorified. He wanted to be worshiped. And we find today that that's the same thing with us. We like the likes on social media. We want the people to like us. And there's a worship issue going on there. And Nebuchadnezzar tells them that if they don't bow down, he's going to throw them into a fiery furnace. And we find here on chapter 3 in verse 16 that they tell him, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." I love it because they tell him no. They say, we're not going to bow down to this idol. And they go on and they let him know that we're not going to negotiate this. They're not going to switch jerseys. So many times we have people that want to live for the world and they want to live for Christ, whichever one is convenient to them at the moment, which one benefits you. And we see in this story that they decided this is not going to benefit them, but they're still going to worship Jesus. And so they were going to let them know that we're believers in God and we're not going to bow down to the gods of Babylon. We only bow down to the one true God. And so in verse 17 it says this: "If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. This is a strong statement. Verse 18, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Here's what they're saying. They're saying our God is capable of delivering us. Our God is capable of doing a miracle to where we don't have to go through this fiery furnace. But if he does not, we're still going to worship him. This is a powerful statement. I'm telling you, in the year 2024, I want you to decide today who you're going to serve. Is it going to be the world? Is it going to be your boss? Is it going to be a paycheck? What is it going to be? Comfort? Or are you going to worship God? Make this year's decision that I am going to put God in first place. I'm not going to bow down to anything else in this world but to God. And they tell him that God will deliver us, but if he doesn't, we're still going to worship him. This is the heart of every believer. This should be the heart of every believer. If God, we know that God can cure our cancer, but if he does not, I'll still worship you. I know God can heal my marriage, but if he does not, I will still worship you. I know that God can deliver that child who is lost, but if he does not, I still, boy, that's the heart of a believer. I'm still going to worship you, God. I believe that God can improve my financial conditions, but if he does not, I still choose in 2024, I'm going to worship him and him alone. How does Nebuchadnezzar respond to this? In verse 19, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it usually is heated. I find this very interesting in the story, that he wanted it 7 times hotter. Here's what I found. I'm from Texas. Once it hits 90 degrees, it doesn't matter if it's 110 degrees. It's already hot. Any heat will work. Any temperature will work on this. Have you ever been like Nebuchadnezzar, where your rage comes out of you? And see, this is what happens when we try to pour wrath out on people. As a parent, have you ever done this to where you went overboard when you're grounding your child, where they do something again and you say, no more TV for a year, no more desserts for a year. You know, you just go overboard, you take everything away. I've heard of parents taking the doors off their kids' rooms, pulling the furniture out, and they got to earn it back. Sometimes you can get so angry at your children or at other people that will pour wrath out. And here's the thing. God is the one who pours wrath out. He's the judge because he's fair, he's honest, he's truth. You and I don't do that well. When we pour wrath out on others, it always turns out bad. And it turns out bad here. Nebuchadnezzar, his soul was boiling, and he wanted what he was feeling in his soul toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and their God. He wanted them to feel it in the burning of their bodies. I mean, think about how angry you have to be to want to burn someone. And this is what happens when we pour out that wrath on others. Look at verse 20. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Verse 21, these men were bound with their cloaks, their tunics, and their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's orders were so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flames of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning furnace. Have you ever been in a situation to where your biggest fear happens and you have no control over it? That's a weird feeling, isn't it? I know in 2023, maybe you've been through some things to where you felt like God didn't pull through, or he didn't answer that prayer the way you thought he should have, or you dealt with situations that were completely out of your control, and you're limping into 2024. Don't know how you made it here. I'll tell you how you made it here. It was the grace of God. God has a plan for you. And again, no matter what you think God should do, we got to be careful with this. We have to choose today that we're going to worship him no matter what. Whatever 2024 comes. It's an election year, and we know how election years are. There's going to be a new disease. There's going to be price gouging. There's going to be riots. There's going to be gas is either going to go up or down. Or I filled my truck up the other day, and it only cost me $64. I was so excited about that. I don't know the last time I've been excited about $64 in a tank. And so we go through these things to where we don't have control, and the housing market, and we see when you pull up Yahoo or Google, you start reading through the news, and everything is, every article you look at is bad. It's just everything is bad. We don't know what's going to happen with the Dallas Cowboys season this year. I'm kidding. But it's one of those things that are up in the air. And if God doesn't let them win the Super Bowl, we're going to go ahead and worship God anyway. Come on, can I hear the church say amen? Have you ever found yourself, though, in a place where things are out of control and your fears are rising up in you and you don't know what to do, and you come to a place to where you feel like, I almost can't trust God? There's moments like this that happen to us, and I need you to hear this. In 2024, no matter what we go through, the root of the issue is, we have to choose this, is worship. Who am I going to worship? And whenever I'm going through things that are uncontrollable, when I'm going through things that are breaking me, when I feel like my faith is weak, when I feel like I'm turning to things that are other than God, I have to stop and remember, who am I going to choose to worship? I need to learn at that moment, when things are out of control and fear is rising up in me, that is the moment that we have to worship. That is the moment that we have to give God praise, because this is what's going to fix the condition of our spirit and our mind, is giving God praise and trusting Him. See, the root of the issue, even in Nebuchadnezzar's time, in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when Daniel was in captivity in Babylon, the root of the issue was worship. It was worship. Let me remind you about what God says about worship. In the law, in Exodus 20, it starts in verse 1. And it says, and God spoke these words, saying, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourselves a carved image. This is where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are dealing with this very literal issue, a carved image, that you will not worship a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven or above, or that is in the earth below. It says, or that is in the water or underneath the earth. Verse 5, you shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Now, I do know jealousy can be bad for us, but jealousy is a good thing for God, because we tend to get jealous over things that we don't need to. And God, His jealousy is always righteous jealousy. Jealousy is someone or something is trying to take my place. If my wife begins to allow something to take my place, it's going to cause jealousy in me. I remember being young in ministry. I began to let ministry take the place of my family. And I was giving more time to a building, to a ministry, to people, than I was my own family. And so my wife got jealous. This is a jealousy of God, when something else is taking the place and it should not. It's saying that God's saying, when He's jealous, He's saying, I love you, and I long for a relationship with you. And if you bring another God into this situation, and that means anything that you put above God, or you make superior to God, or you make equal with God, what He's saying here is that you're committing adultery against Him. You're having a lust issue, because He says the only place that I am desiring is first place in your life. He wants to be at the top. He wants to be in the center of your heart. So my question is to you today, who is going to be in the center of your heart during 2024? 2023, you can look back. We can't unring bells, but we can know where we came from. And if you go into 2024 and you think, I'm going to do the same thing that I did in 2023, but I'm going to expect different results, they tell us that's called insanity. And so I want you to think about this next year coming up, that we can't unring a bell, but I can make a change today. I can begin to put God in first place and see what He does in my marriage. Just watch what He does in your finances. Watch what He does in your mental health. Watch what He does in your physical health. Watch what God does when you put Him in the right place. The point of the 10 Commandments is this. The first 2 are all about God, and it's about how to worship Him and how to worship Him alone. Now, the other 8 commandments is just applications and implications of the first 2. And so here's what we learn. If you worship God alone, I want you to hear me today, because when you learn to worship God alone, you don't worship sex and commit adultery. When you worship God alone, you don't worship your reputation and tell lies. You don't have to wear a mask. You don't have to make people think one thing while you're living another life. Don't worship your reputation. Worship God. When you worship God alone, you won't worship your possessions and steal from man and steal from God. I say this all the time. One of the reasons that only 4% of the church of the body of Christ across the nation, only 4% tithe, is because we're so greedy. We worship our possessions, and then we end up stealing from God. We worship our possessions, and we end up stealing from man. If you obey the first two commandments, this is a worship issue. Everything in your life is a worship issue. And if you'll learn to worship the first two commands, you will have God at the center of your life. So here's my question for you today. Who is going to be on that throne of your heart this year? Are you going to make that intentional to put God there? Or are you going to continue to let possessions, continue to let career, continue to let your children, continue to let your spouse or anyone else take that place? Because what'll happen is we're not materialistic people, we're eternal people. And when we try to make materialistic things God, it drives us to a place of adultery in our lives, to where we don't have things in the right place. God's not where he needs to be. We don't worship him right. Everything else fails. Our finances, our health, our mental health, our relationships, our jobs, everything about us begins to fail. Are you in that position today? I ask you to turn your life around, give it to God and put him on the center. If you're a Christian and you've been letting these other things seep in and begin to, if you will, have affairs with different material things that have gotten bigger than God in your life and you can't do without it. One of the biggest ones is that phone. I mean, the phone can be a god to us because it's always in our hand. It rules us. And so we want to make sure that God is in the first place. There's nothing wrong with your phone. There's nothing wrong with your careers. There's nothing wrong with your children or your spouse or your money. It's how we put it in the position it's supposed to go in. God needs to be first this year. Who or what is at the top of your priority list? And who or what is going to be your greatest pleasure or your pursuit this year? I want to finalize this. I want to give you 6 things about worship. 6 things that I want you to think about worship this year. As we go into this 2024, I want you to really understand that worship is really one of your root issues of everything that's going on. Who are you worshiping? What are you worshiping? Is God in first place? Here's the first thing I want to remind you of. We do not worship God to get results we want, but we worship God to find out what his will is. We need to know the will of God. And we see this in the story. People try to say that I've tried Jesus and he didn't work. Here's what people really say, what they're saying when they say I've tried Jesus. I asked him for something and I didn't get what I asked for. That's what they mean when they say they've tried Jesus. Listen, I'm not telling you to try Jesus. I'm telling you to put Jesus on. I'm telling you to begin to put him at the center of your heart and on top of the throne there. And so, again, we do not worship God to find results we want. We worship God to find out what his will is. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they worshiped God, and they found out God's will was for them to go through this fiery furnace. But it was to glorify God. And so they were saved through this miracle. And so we'll get more into that. The 3 Hebrew men, they knew it was God's will because they worshiped God's will. That's why they weren't afraid of the furnace. And so it wasn't their will to go through the fiery furnace. It was God's will. So we worship him to find out what his will is, not to get what we want. Here's the second thing I want you to understand. We don't choose suffering. Listen, there's people out there, they choose suffering just to show who they are and to show God who they are. We don't choose suffering, but we choose God's will. If it means suffering, then so be it. But we want to follow God's will. If there was a Jewish exception clause in Nebuchadnezzar's law that day, I would have told the Jews to take that. But there wasn't. And so they had to figure this out. And so there wasn't a deal for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to take. So they had to go through the fiery furnace. They didn't seek suffering, but they did seek God. And in his will, they decided that if God wants us to go through this fiery furnace, then he'll put us in there. But if he does not want us to go through the fiery furnace, he will give us an escape. And so that was the big thing there. So we don't choose suffering, but we choose God's will. If it means suffering, so be it. God's will over that. Here's the third thing I want to tell you. If your goal is comfort and ease, you will eventually bow down to another god. If your goal is comfort and ease, you will eventually bow down to another god. You will deny the God, the one and true only God. You'll deny him because Jesus tells us that one of the things that we're going to endure in our life is suffering. It's a promise he makes that there will be suffering in our lives. He never promised us that we would be opted out of suffering. There is going to be suffering in our lives. We're in a broken world. We deal with sinful people every day. People sin and it affects you. That's the way this world works. At some point, walking with God is going to cause you to choose between comfort and Christ. And you got to make that decision. You got to make that decision. These men could have chosen comfort and ease, and they would have been given government jobs. They would have been given good food. They would have been given praise around town. They would have been given everything except for peace with God. So we have to decide, what are we going to do? There's Americans here that they choose the comfort of a bed because a 10 o'clock service is too early for them. They don't want to go every single Sunday. They got other things to do. And I'm going to tell you right now, the Bible tells us if we can't handle the foot soldiers, what are we going to do when the horses come? And what he's saying is, if you can't deal with the things of today, what are you going to do whenever it really gets hard? What are you going to do when life really comes at you and we begin to be challenged on whether or not we can serve God or our church doors can be open? I'm telling you, we can't take for granted the opportunities we have to celebrate Christ as a family in the church. This won't always be here. This will be a place one day. The Bible teaches us we're going to be having to go underground. We're going to have to be trying to serve God, and our lives will be on the line, like in many countries it is today. Comfort is not always going to be there. You have to choose. Are you going to choose comfort, or are you going to choose Christ? If your goal's comfort, you will bow down to another God. You will deny God. Here's the fourth thing I want to tell you. In worship, our goal is to be obedient and be faithful to Jesus. That's our goal, is to be obedient and faithful to Jesus. We need to be very clear on this. Our goal is not comfort and ease. When it comes to 2024, it's not going to be, God, as long as I have a paycheck, as long as I have a roof over my head, and God, let me keep my car and let my family be healthy and I'll serve you. No. If I don't have a roof over my head, I'll serve you. Our goal can't be comfort. Our goal can't even be winning or be successful. Our goal in life is obedience. It's obedience. Our goal is to be faithful until we see Jesus, until we hear him say, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." Until then, we got to be obedient. And can I say this? When it comes to obedience, please listen to this. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. You ever told your children to take the trash out, and you come back and they haven't done it yet, and you say, "Hey, take the trash out." And the third time, take the trash out. The fourth time, you're kicking the trash can and putting it in their room and saying, "Take the trash out." And what do the kids say? I'm going to. They think they're being obedient, but delayed obedience is still disobedience. Our goal is to be faithful and to be obedient. And I want you to think about this. This may mean that you may have to go through hell while here on earth. You may have to go through some hard times, some trials and tribulations and struggles with your health, with your family, with your marriage, with what people do to you. You may have to go through hell, but you got to determine, am I going to worship God even though I go through hell here on this earth? The powerful part of this story to me is that they got thrown in the fiery furnace. And let's say God did not deliver them. Let's say God didn't deliver them and they did burn up. Do you understand that is as close to hell as those Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have ever been? They would have woken up in paradise. They would have been in their heavenly home. But understand this, the same king who wanted to turn it up 7 times hotter was still as close to heaven as he'll ever be. So I want you to think about that. When you're going through a fire, when you're going through troubles and struggles this year, this is something that we have to understand that Nebuchadnezzar, he has an eternal furnace waiting for him. If he didn't bow his heart to God, he was going to spend eternity in a furnace. Isn't it ironic that this man's throwing these young men in the furnace, this king's throwing them in the furnace, but yet his end result's going to be the furnace if he doesn't bow to God. And so we might go through things in our lives, and more than likely we will. For these men, we see in the story, God didn't even spare them to be thrown into the fiery furnace. I find it interesting when they crucified Jesus, they at least took time to take his clothes off and prepare him. They were so mad at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The Bible said his face changed. And he said, "Turn the furnace up 7 times hotter." And they went and took some mighty men and they went to throw them in the furnace, and they threw them in fully clothed. They did tie them up. They put ropes on them and bound them and threw them into this furnace. It's very interesting to me that God didn't spare them this, but what awaits them if they didn't get spared was King Jesus. They would have woke up with their Savior, and that was as close to hell as that ever be. So if you're going through things today, understand that this is a principle that we have to understand. Our goal is not about comfort and ease. It's not about winning and succeeding. It's about obedience and faithfulness to Jesus. Here's the fifth thing. I learned this just in a principle of worship outside these walls. Everybody wants you to worship what they're doing. They want you to worship them. They want you to worship their ideas. And here's what I want you to understand about worship. Someone will always show up in your life and demand that you bow down to them. Someone's always going to demand that you bow down to them. There are people that want to be Nebuchadnezzar. Do what I say, or I'm going to pour out my wrath on you. There are people in your life, 2024 is going to be filled with that, I promise you. Do what I say, conform to what I want you to do, or else. We saw it just a couple of years ago with COVID, to conform. It may be a boss, it may be a spouse, it may be a boyfriend, a girlfriend, it may be a bully, it may be a sibling, I don't know. But here's what I'm trying to tell you is don't bow down to anyone but Jesus. Choose today whom you're going to serve. No, be a worshiper today so you know who you're going to bow down to. These men practice worshiping Jesus. We see it in the second chapter of Daniel. They practice bowing down to Jesus. And when you practice bowing down to Jesus, it helps you to stand up against evil. When you bow down to Jesus, it helps you, and you don't have a question of who do you bow down to. You learn to stand up against evil. You learn to stand up against tyranny. You learn to stand up against people that say, bow down before me, because we say, I only worship one God, and his name is Jesus. When you're practicing worshiping Jesus, you'll be able to stand up against evil. I promise you, every single time. Here's the last point I want to make to you today. When it comes to worship, God will either deliver you, watch this, from death, or he'll deliver you through death. He's either going to deliver you from death, or he'll deliver you through death. They said, our God will deliver us. That didn't mean that they were going to live. They didn't know if they were going to live, but they knew that one way or the other, God was going to deliver them either from death or through death. It means that he will somehow do a miracle, or he's going to deliver me either way. They knew that. They stood in confidence in this because they knew the God they worshiped. They spent time with him and they knew the God that they worshiped. How powerful is that? In either life or death, the deliverance is guaranteed. When you're a believer in Christ, deliverance is guaranteed. We don't have to worry about death. We don't have to worry about the sting of death. We don't have to worry about our eternity. I know that when I die and I close my eyes on this side, that I will wake up, I will cross death's chilly waters, and I will wake up in the presence of my King, and I will hear, well done, thy good and faithful servant, because I knew who I worshiped, and I stood on that. See, God might get you through it here on earth. You might have to go through some things. Noah went through a flood. I don't have time to unpackage that story, but go and read it in Genesis, that what Noah had to go through. Everyone abandoned him. Everyone thought he was crazy. He still had to go through a flood. Think about floating on that water for so many days after with all the animals and being alone and having to start over on earth. Noah had to go through it. Think about that. Daniel had to go through Babylon. I can't even unpackage this on what Daniel had to go through as a young man. Do you realize that Daniel, he was over the king's harem? And you know what they did to captured men? They would castrate them. Daniel would have been a eunuch. I mean, think about the things that Daniel had to go through to be there in Babylon. God didn't deliver him from it, but he did deliver him through it. Jesus had to go through the cross. He even said, if this cup can pass from me, let it. But not my will, but your will be done. And you know what? Today we get to stand upon the work of the cross because God didn't deliver Jesus from death. He delivered him through death. I think about the scripture in Psalms 24 that says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Do you understand that you may go through it, but you don't always get to fly over it? God may have you go through something, but I promise you today, church, in 2024, he's going to get you through whatever it is. He's going to get you through whatever it is. The last little thing I want to share with you as we close is this. We see in the story they go through the fire. And this is powerful, but the only thing that burns up in that fire was the Babylonian ropes. The ropes that they put on them from Babylon is the only thing that burned up in that fire. We even see in the story that unbelievers get burned up in the fire, but the believers do not. In the story, the king stands up and says, didn't we throw 3 men in that fire? Why is it I see 4 and one looks like the Son of Man? Talking about Jesus in that fire with him. Everything burned up. Everything that belongs to the believer was untouched. Can I tell you something? God sees where you're at. God knows what you're going through. And when you serve God, you'll never lose anything. You think you do, but you never lose anything. Because no matter what we go through on this earth, this is as close to hell as we'll ever be. For an unbeliever, no matter what they go through on this earth, this is as close to heaven as they'll ever be. My prayer.